I do not think that any civilization can be called complete until it has progressed from sophistication to unsophistication and made a conscious return to simplicity of thinking and living. Says Lin Yutang, The Importance of Living. Helen and Scott Nearing says in their book, Living the Good Life, we had tried living in several cities, at home and abroad. However, in varying degrees, we met the same obstacles to a simple and quiet life: complexity, artificiality, and heavy overhead costs. These costs were payable only in cash, which had to be earned under conditions imposed upon one by the city for its benefit and advantage. Even if cash income had been of no concern to them, Helen and Scott were convinced that it was virtually impossible to counter city pressures and preserve physical health, mental balance, and social sanity through long periods of city dwelling. Thus, after careful consideration, Helen and Scott Nearing decided that they could live a saner, quieter, and more worthwhile life in the country than in any urban or suburban center. And finally, during the deepest part of the Great Depression in 1932, Helen and Scott Nearing moved from New York City to a farm in the Green Mountains of Vermont. At the outset, they thought of the venture as a personal search for a simple, satisfying life on the land, to be devoted to mutual aid and harmlessness, with an ample margin of leisure in which to do personally constructive and creative work. And with the passage of time and the accumulation of experience, they came to regard their valley in Vermont as a laboratory in which they were testing out certain principles and procedures of living a good life. Helen and Scott wanted to demonstrate the possibility of living sanely in a troubled world. The ideal answer to this problem seemed to be organic simplicity, which would require only a small capital, could operate with low overhead costs, would yield a modest living in exchange for half-time work, and therefore would leave half of the year for research, reading, writing, and speaking. This video aims to present a report on what Helen and Scott Nearing tried to do, how they did it, and how well or ill they succeeded in achieving their purposes. Helen and Scott Nearing left the city with two objectives in mind. The first was economic. They sought to make a depression-free living, as independent as possible of the commodity and labor markets, which could not be interfered with by employers. Their second aim was hygienic. They wanted to maintain and improve their health. According to Helen, the pressures of city life were exacting, and they sought a simple basis of well-being where contact with the earth and homegrown organic food would play a large part. Henry David Thoreau famously said in Walden, "Simplicity should take the place of multiplicity, complexity, and confusion. Instead of the hectic, mad rush of busyness, we must intend a quiet pace with time to wonder and observe." And after years of experience, Helen and Scott were able to reverse the complexities of city existence with a fairly simple life pattern. As they saw it, simple living must include simplicity, freedom from anxiety, an opportunity to be useful, and to live harmoniously. These are not the only values in life, but they are among the important ideals, objectives, and concepts which a seeker after the good life might reasonably expect to develop in a satisfactory, natural environment. However, as things stand today, it is not this combination of values but rather their opposite, that is, complexity, anxiety, waste, ugliness, and uproar, which men associate with the urban centers of Western civilization. They wanted to make a living under conditions that would preserve and enlarge joy in workmanship, would give a sense of achievement, thereby promoting integrity and self-respect.
The last time I was in New York, I went into a building, and when there was an exit on the outside air, the window was locked. You couldn't get air through, you couldn't get sunlight through, you couldn't see out. It's just exactly like being in a dungeon. Hopelessly removed from the earth and all of its contacts.
Helen and Scott, Design for Living, says, raise as much of your own food as local soil and climatic conditions would permit. Put up your own buildings with stone and wood from the place, doing the work yourself. Hold down to the barest minimum number of tools, gadgets, and machines, which you might buy from the assembly lines of big business. And if you have to have such machines for a few hours or days in a year, you should rent or trade them from local people instead of buying and owning them. Henry Thoreau wrote in his journal, I love best to have each thing in its season only, and enjoy doing without it at all other times. The principles which governed Helen and Scott gardening were based on the principle of Thoreau Walden book. Helen and Scott says, first we wanted to live 12 months in the year, from a garden which enjoyed barely 3 months of frost-free weather. Second, we wanted to eat fresh, unprocessed food. Third, we wanted a variety of garden products, which would furnish a rounded diet. And finally, fourth, we wanted to reduce canning and preserving to a minimum. Through the years, they have been able to reach all 4 objectives. However, most difficult among these 4 assignments was the 12 months of fresh food from the garden. They approached the problem in 2 ways. The first was eating with the seasons. Helen says, there is something extravagant and irresponsible about eating strawberries and green peas in a cold climate every month in the year. Such practices ignore the meaningful cycle of the seasons. Those who dodge it are like children who skip a grade in school and always have the feeling that they have missed something. Henry Thoreau, right in Walden, I learned from my 2 years experiment that it would cost incredibly little trouble to obtain one's necessary food, even in this latitude, that many a man may use as simple a diet as the animals and yet retain health and strength. Helen and Scott tell us in their book, Living a Good Life, coming from New York City, with its extravagant displays of non-essentials and its extensive wastes of everything, from food and capital goods to time and energy, we were surprised and delighted to find how much of the city clutter and waste we could toss overboard. We felt as free, in this respect, as a caged wild bird who finds himself once more on the wing. The demands and requirements which weigh upon city consumers no longer restricted us, to the extent that we were able to meet our consumer needs in our own way and in our own good time. We had freed ourselves from dependence upon the market economy. Needless to say, Vermont life liberated Helen and Scott as consumers from the limitations, restrictions, and compulsions of the city market. It had an even more profound effect upon them as producers. They understood dwellers in a remote valley cannot send or phone to the corner grocery an hour before supper They must plan and prepare during the previous season. If radishes are to be ready for the table on the 1st of June, they must be planted not later than the first week in May. If seeds are to yield the best results, the soil must be prepared before the planting day. Thus, to enjoy fresh radishes on June, they have to plan months in advance. When someone asked Scott, "The life in Vermont is different in texture from that of a metropolis. Is it better or worse?" Scott says, "For us, the life in Vermont was definitely better because it permitted frequent contacts with nature, because it afforded an opportunity to master and direct nature forces, because manual skills were still practiced, and because the routine of living was less exacting." He added, "Instead of spending early and late hours in dirty, noisy subway or train, we stayed on our own grounds, week in and week out. Traveling to and from work, for us, meant walking 200 yards from kitchen to sap house. Finally, where there is a choice, one chooses the better part rather than the worse. Philosophy of living good life says living is a business in which we all engage, and life in Vermont can be justified as an instance and an example of sane living in an insane world." That's all for today's video. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more empowering content. Thanks for watching.